We're now past the peak cloud hype of the 2010s and well into the era of cloud maturity. But even as businesses have come to terms with multi-cloud and hybrid cloud models, new considerations have arisen, such as the growing need for cloud sovereignty and regional data center demand. AI has put additional pressure on firms to figure out exactly what they're running in the cloud, as agentic AI drives organizations to consider always-on workloads and whether this is feasible in a public cloud model. So how can leaders navigate this changing cloud landscape, and what's on the horizon? You're listening to the IT Pro podcast. Hi, I'm Rory Bathgate. Today, I'm delighted to be speaking to Alex Grimshaw, Chief Technology Officer for Microsoft Azure UK, to explore what he sees as the key trends for the cloud and how AI will shape it in the coming years. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Roy. Great to be on your show, and looking forward to a very engaging conversation.
So I'm going to start with a broad question. Yes. We're sort of post-rush to adopt cloud services for a lot of firms right now. How would you describe the current era for the cloud?
Yeah, it's a very interesting time, as you suggest. It's the way I would frame it is when I previously engaged with customers and certainly partners as well over the last couple of years, it was generally the conversation was like, how do I garner business value from the cloud in general? Like, what is this cloud thing and how do I get value from it? I think certainly more over the last, I'd say 12 months, the conversations have shifted now where it's more, how do we transform our business through the use of AI, and what are the steps to embracing this technology? So what are the various stages of how we get there? So, for example, I'm seeing far more acceleration of a data strategy, for example. So cloud maturity for me, certainly for my engagements, whether that's from like C-level or IT leaders, more from we're very comfortable with IaaS, but now what's our approach to becoming more pervasive or using more sophisticated services like AI, and how do we enable or garner an internal kind of culture and kind of process where we can adopt these faster moving services like AI and microservices, etc., in this kind of new bold world. That's certainly what I'm seeing that shift happen.
You've said the word that comes up so frequently now, which is AI, of course. If we can start maybe a few years ago, what are some of the key changes that the adoption of generative AI kickstarted in the cloud, either with Azure specifically or cloud more generally? What are some of the architectural shifts we've seen?
Yeah, I think twofold. First of all, a big part of the conversations I generally have are, it's more about culture for me. It's the cultural shift that I've seen change. And that's not only from IT leaders and IT departments and the people that work in those departments, but more so across the entire organization, right? Because traditionally, IT should be seen as an enabler, but as we know, a lot of business leaders and business function leaders would certainly see IT as being some sort of hindrance or what are IT going to do again to us? They're going to slow down our operation. They just want their operation to continue running, right? I've certainly seen a shift now where most business leaders understand that without the IT department and a collective unison of everyone going on this journey where ultimately what is the vision utilizing AI, what are the business outcomes that we're trying to realize, how do we get there together? As I said, there was certainly a fragmentation a few years ago where IT was something that IT people did, but now this AI kind of embracement is certainly something that the entire organization can take the journey together. And of course, as we know, taking a journey together means it's going to be far more likely to be successful as well.
It's interesting to see that evolution that you're describing, whether it's on the cultural or the technological level, happen in tandem with some other changes. So, for example, the shift to more hybrid cloud and more multi-cloud from some businesses. Do you see those as sort of aligned journeys that are complementary of one another? So, say when it comes to AI and a mixture of or a hybrid approach with some public, some private cloud. Is this a complementary approach for businesses to take?
It is, and it's, I see two contrasting, I'd say, behaviours. One from those industries which are legislatively or regulatory constrained or mandated or governed. So you think public sector, FSI, where of course they, it's a more tentative adoption of cloud in general. So whether there's data sovereignty requirements or data residency requirements. And of course, those two things are very different. And although clearly a lot of people use them in those two terms as the same thing, clearly that they are not the same thing. But I certainly see, a more tentative shift in terms of data classification levels, obviously snapping to policies and regulatory needs. But then, of course, the advantage that those industries that are not one of those regulated or legislative industries have the opportunity, I would say, to move much faster. So think about, for example, digital natives or startups or general commercial organizations like retail or manufacturing, for example. They can be far more run at their own pace in terms of how comfortable they are in terms of, do they go all in on public cloud? Do they dip their little toe into the public cloud while remaining on-prem? Do they have a mixture between the two because they're still not quite sure about asset governance and where their assets need to lie or should lie? Obviously, that's based on where they need to consume them from as well. So I think I see certainly very different behaviours based on whether they're in an industry which, as I say, is governed versus in an industry where they don't have the same kind of shackles or they have to appreciate a central body or authority.
There's a few different things to get into there that you've raised. Just to start with, that feeling of still being able to try things out, maybe dip your toe into public cloud and keep a bit on-prem. In some conversations, you are hearing an increasing sense of urgency. It feels like every year now we hear, last year was the year to try things out, this year is the year to deploy. In your conversations with customers, is there still that desire to sandbox, to try things out? And are customers beginning to be worried about being left behind or being behind when it comes to AI?
Yeah, I think there's certainly some sense of FOMO across certain industries. If I give you an example, so prior to my current role, I was the CTO of HMRC. Clearly, you will have had some dealings with that organisation. Be well aware of what their aspirations are. When HMRC a number of years ago realised that they needed to embrace public cloud, not only from a cloud economics perspective, but also from an efficiency and modernisation agenda perspective, I think you have two options as an organisation if you're looking at public cloud. One is you either go, let's find a really small, discrete, completely independent workload, and we move that into the cloud. We may be architecture as well. We clearly don't want everyone lifting and shifting as it is, because that's not the most efficient way to run cloud workloads. But if you can move that and then operate it in the cloud, it's almost like, as you say, that first step into the public cloud. It allows you to create some governance models, some patterns, maybe an enterprise landing zone, all them kind of good things. Or you go for the most gnarly, super interdependent, almost even having very stack technologies as well. And you go, you know what? If we can move that thing and operate it in the cloud, that means we can move anything. And what was obviously, in retrospect, looking back, it was a great decision point. But HMRC went for actually the biggest, most gnarliest workload to try out. They moved the enterprise tax management platform, which collects over £365 billion worth of tax revenue every year. You don't get much more mission critical than that in the UK. No. So they actually went and we, in collaboration with obviously the customer and Capgemini, we moved that workload to Azure, so it was SAP based, and that still operates today. Completely mission critical, it operates there today. But of course, what that meant to the director generals, the board, the rest of the organization was, look, if we can move this, we can move your business workload safely, consistently, and actually we'll get so much more business benefits from doing so. So go on this journey with us. As I said, it really has that great effect on culture.
It's those kind of case studies that that's a reason that we like to discuss them on the podcast and on the website, because organizations, I think, appreciate those examples. One of the other points of anxiety or interest that you mentioned there was data residency and data sovereignty. And cloud sovereignty, we know, is something that a rising number of UK organizations are interested in. So we had coverage earlier this year that over half of UK organizations now say it's critical to their data management strategy. I wonder if, first of all, you could tease out the differences between the two that you hinted to earlier.
Yeah, I mean, outside of public sector, where there's a very defined data classification levels, you've got official sensitive as a handling caveat sits within that official classification. Then you've got secret and top secret. Now, clearly, secret and top secret generally applies to certain organizations, and they generally, as you imagine and you will respect, certainly have very different perspectives on what data sovereignty means to them. Traditionally, they will keep a lot of their workloads on-prem, and it absolutely makes sense to do that. The more the official and official sensitive classifications, of course, in public sector, it's about the organization's risk appetite and actually them really understanding their assets and their data as well. Who needs to consume it? Where does it need to lie? What are the regulations or government policies that dictate where that has to reside, and things like that as well? So public sector is a bit more defined. Other organizations where it might be a preference from a data residency perspective, because of course it would depend on where their consumers want to consume the data from. You've obviously got performance challenges there, latency, what are the interdependencies there to other workloads that might not sit in that same geography as well. So you've got all of those factors. For me, data residency and data sovereignty generally means, from a data residency perspective, that there is a requirement there that all of your data is resident and never leaves the shores of a defined boundary or geographical boundary. Data sovereignty for me means if during the operation of that workload, if there, for example, is a support expectation, that support function would not be outside of the geographical constraints of that region again. So for me, sovereignty generally means absolutely there's no eyes on that data outside of that boundary. But data residency just for me means that the data resides in that place.
And is data sovereignty a concern that's coming up in your conversation with customers right now?
No, because again, I think the terminology of what that means, I think it's describing what that means. And ultimately, you could argue that it has nothing to do with the definition, right? It's all about what the customer needs are, like what's driving their anxiety or their need to have data in a specific place. Sometimes it's a ultra risk averse position, of course, as you can imagine. And when you look at the current backdrop of recent events, then you can understand why that would be, right? So obviously we've got the M&S incident that happened quite recently in the public domain. So people are more concerned about how they protect their assets. So I get that, but that doesn't necessarily mean, if we host it in the UK, that means that it's more secure. It doesn't mean that at all. Residency, sovereignty, and securing your assets are very different things. So it's I think it's an educational conversation that I generally have with customers more than this is something that we've defined collectively. Let's start from there. It's more of let's have a conversation about what you think that means or what your outcome is that you're trying to deliver, and then we'll talk about that instead of definitions.
That makes a lot of sense. When it comes to residency as well, is there the requisite infrastructure for all the residency demands in the UK right now? And what work is, Microsoft, but also the sector doing to boost availability for things like data centers within the UK?
Well, for quite a number of years now, we've had two regions or two separate regions, what we refer to as UK South and UK West. We made in November, it's November 23, we made a huge commitment to UK government that we would make a huge investment in UK AI infrastructure particularly, and obviously a skilling commitment is there because, of course, it's not only ideal just to have infrastructure in the UK, but of course you want to be able to skill up people so they can actually utilize that infrastructure. So yeah, we made a huge investment that we would invest that over a 3-year period. So again, that huge investment should come to full fruition by certainly the end of, I'd say, 2026.
And on that point of skills, is this as much skills within the organizations that are looking to utilize these data centers as much as it is data center operators and obviously people to actually build the things?
Yeah, it's, I mean, you've kind of hit on a particular passion of mine, which is tech intensity. I have one of my various hats as the CTO in the UK businesses. I lead on learning for the organization. So, and that's 3 bits for me. One is tech intensity, which we all know what that is, right? It's having the understanding to be able to utilize our technology. But also for me, as important is understanding of how our customers use our technology, which I call industrial empathy, because I suppose how do you write and produce products and services if you don't really understand how customers would use them? So so for me, tech intensity actually means we need to be educated as customer zero almost in our own organization, and we have a huge amount of efforts and investment in that learning process to ensure we're all really comfortable and really conversant around our technologies and we're able to use them all. But then, of course, that's about translating that to customers, because what's the point in having this great innovation in the cloud if people aren't feeling confident and capable of utilizing that new technology?
On the point of the new technology that you've just mentioned, we spoke a little bit about AI earlier, but I feel that we do have to dig in a little bit on what this transformation is that's going on and what deploying AI in the cloud actually looks like. So 2 years ago, we were talking about LLMs primarily when we were discussing generative AI, we were discussing AI workloads. Now, attention has largely shifted to agentic AI. So we heard just recently that Microsoft expects 1.3 billion AI agents to be operational by 2028. So how does all of this impact the cloud? And what needs to be done to support all of this deployment?
It's interesting, isn't it? If I touch on my conversations with customers, more recent conversations, I think a lot of organizations really have a long way to go still to really understand the true value of AI, even in Gen AI. For some, AI simply means co-pilot type functionality, or it means a human interface to an AI entity or a more informed chatbot, even in some places. I think there's a very rich tapestry of functionality and autonomy that agentic AI can bring to bear. And it's certainly obviously a significant transformation enabler for many organizations. I mean, I think about like C2C, B2C, B2B, because like enabling autonomous AI agents is going to really supercharge like human productivity, because, and I know there's some concerns and maybe we can address some of them later, but I think that this is such a revolutionary time. I think back to how like the internet massively changed the entire retail sector, for example, in that it created so many new roles because it released almost the repetitive burden and some of the back-end orchestration from how people operated. And then this resulted in creating brand new roles. So like digital marketers, web designers, content creators, etc. So I think we're going to have a similar piece here in terms of how we absolutely define and revolutionize certain industries.
There's definitely a lot of conversations happening around how much of this can be used to, reduce toil and help automate tasks and kind of fulfill that automation picture that we've been discussing for some years now. Before we get into some of those challenges, which you hinted at, or potential concerns around AI, I've also had some interesting discussions recently around how specifically AI agents present a different picture when it comes to compute demand compared to other workloads, primarily because these are workloads that need constant inference. And this can have an effect on the kind of pricing when it comes to running AI agents in the cloud. Are these conversations already happening with customers? And how do you see AI agents versus, say, an LLM workload as different in the cloud?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. As I said, I think there's such a maturity curve that needs to take place.
Yeah.
For example, when you think about the areas in a business that can be utilized by, if we kind of just bucket AI together as one big kind of set of capabilities, like if you think 4 distinct places for me that where AI can have benefits is like reshaping business processes. So I think about if we've got human-born workflows, so humans have created workflows, which essentially are business processes within organizations. Now, because they're human created, obviously there's certain inefficiencies there because there's a lot of things that humans don't do very well. So I certainly see agentic models and the orchestration thereof certainly having a big part in this space where almost like a fire and forget almost position where you want to do something, it's a business process, off it goes, and actually the agents are doing all the work in the background rather than people, which of course then releases us to do more creative things and more things that are more, I would say, critical thinking. And that's certainly something let's come back to, because I've got a real passion about this critical thinking that we need to continue to have rather than AI replacing some of that. Let's come back to that. And of course, then we've got things like reinventing customer engagement. So I talked about HMRC before, one of the biggest contact centers in Europe, HMRC have got. So when I think about the introduction of multimodal interactions, for example, having agents that are just listening almost on all these different types of channels. And when I think about another passionate area of mine is neurodiversity and inclusion. And again, that's a huge area, right? Multimodal has such vast benefits for those people that want to communicate with the organizations in very different ways. And then business model innovation, of course, or bending the curve on innovation. AI is going to make huge strides in certain industries like drug discovery or digital manufacturing. Every industry is ripe for some sort of business model innovation or just general innovation in some form. And then when I think about employees themselves, this is about enriching the employee experience. So not only increasing everyone's productivity, but also when you're attracting talent and retaining talent to the market, again, you would have a certain stereotype of certain organizations, maybe some in the public sector, where, if you came to work for that organization, you wouldn't get to use the latest and greatest tech. And you'd be given a brick of a laptop and it wouldn't necessarily be running the latest tech. Organizations, by embracing AI, can be seen as employers of choice and very attractive to people entering the workforce as well. So that there's lots in there. I just think that I still feel there's some hesitancy around customers where they're thinking, right, where do I start? I'll start that. I'm still finding people are thinking about how do I use this co-pilot thing as almost that first step. How do I get confidence in what AI is? Because I want to see what it does, what business value it brings. Is it transparent? Do I understand how it's deriving outcomes and content? Yes. And then, of course, then you'll think about little pilots which are using machine learning or AI, where it's about, okay, let's see what this can do in an isolated incident where it's not about human interaction. It's about it actually doing a task or a thing in itself. And then growing from that, you'll get interdepartmental AI, where actually the agents then come in and start to do departmental integrations and tasking as well. And then ultimately, if you've again going back to the cultural piece, if it's everyone's on that bus, then of course the entire organization really embraces AI, and you've got a culture of trying new things with AI, and actually everyone ultimately trusting AI and the value that it brings.
So it's interesting that point you made there around some of these small pilot schemes that maybe those more hesitant firms are running. Are these more about improving trust in AI and understanding of AI, or are they about demonstrating potential return on investment when it comes to AI?
Yeah, all of the above. Certainly, you've got to have some measures of success or metrics in there. Obviously, one of those is the ROI. One is this: do we have what form of skilling do we require to make this scalable and repeatable? If it's successful, have we got skills across the organisation to utilise and build and operate this kind of workload using these more pervasive services? And then, of course, you've got all the metrics that you would normally associate with any pilot of any form using technology or any other new innovation, where what business value does this ultimately bring? And actually, you touched on it earlier from a cloud economics perspective. Do these services that we're consuming, whether they are LLMs or they are organizations where they're even trialing creation of their own LLMs or even SLMs, and then ultimately you've got agentic stuff and maybe smaller consumable chunks of more pervasive services. It's like at what maturity level do they have existing knowledge and patterns and governance and enterprise architectural principles and solution architectural principles and data architectural principles and all the others to actually embrace and almost through osmosis pull this into their existing operation, certainly from the enterprise architecture perspective. And then how scalable is this thing? Did it take an army to build this little pilot? We're not seeing the return. It's obviously not going to convince anyone from a trust perspective, as you say. It's not going to potentially win over the security naysayers, but ultimately it's got to be successful for all stakeholders involved, and all stakeholders have to have their own metrics of success as well for that particular pilot.
You mentioned security naysayers just now, and earlier you hinted at, there were at least initially some concerns around the technology itself. Earlier on, a year, 2 years ago, there were a lot of conversations happening around the potential data security concerns of AI, particularly AI in the public cloud. Are these still concerns that you hear from customers? And what are some of the main hurdles as far as customers see it to their adoption?
Yeah, I'm not hearing any concerns from my customers. I mean, obviously, some of the things I might have heard or seen in the press certainly point to some concerns around, and I'm not sure where this has been born out of, to be fair, that somehow tools like Copilot can access data that you yourself couldn't actually access it. I mean, it doesn't make sense, because if you think about how Copilot works, it's essentially an inheritance model where you are inheriting the data governance and access rights that you already have to the underlying data in the organization anyway. So it has no ability to bypass them things, because for one, it's operating in the context of your user authority. It doesn't have some central Uber admin rights where it can just do whatever it feels like, because who would release a product that would do that anyway?
Yeah.
But again, it's just inheritance. So if you've got a robust data governance model in place, any AI agent user interface should not be able to view over any data, certainly not consume any data or retrieve any data that's outside the bounds of you as an individual using that. So in your context, it shouldn't have any access to any data that you wouldn't have access to anyway. All it's doing essentially is just, as we know, LLMs are fantastic at language. So ultimately, it's the use of language, but they still have the same access to the data. It's their interpretation of what data we require that's the value here, not the fact that they can very weirdly like circumvent security governance.
So another concern around the potential impact of AI has come from Microsoft itself, actually. Earlier in the year, there was a report on how generative AI may impact the critical thinking skills of employees. Microsoft and Carnegie Mellon University found that there's a potential for critical thinking skills to be impacted by AI tools if you don't take the right approach. What would you say about this? And what do you think the right approach is to prevent this from happening?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, you're right. The research of Microsoft, we released a paper that kind of challenged almost the idea that the Copilot type technologies were almost dumbing down our ability to critically think about scenarios, because a lot of people may utilize a tool like that and just take for granted what the response is. It's not augmenting human thought, it's almost replacing human thought, which is clearly not the idea here. What I've been doing internally, and I mentioned before, I'm one of our learning leaders. I've been running workshops with groups of our employees to say, look, when you think about the use of things like Copilot, there's two areas I want you to really think about. One is filtering out the noise, the volume of emails, chats, Teams messages, outside noise. It can be so overwhelming at times, especially if you come back from leave, for example, for a couple of weeks. You will come back and there's a huge amount of things to go through. AI is great at sifting through that, maybe prioritizing things, but actually, at the end of the day, what's a priority for you might not be a priority for the Copilot. So you've got to bring a level of critical thinking to what it thinks is important and what you should focus on first. So kind of bring those two things together. And then what I've talked about is critical thinking in general. It's that I think maybe it's a cultural thing, but I constantly challenge any output from AI, not because it's prudent to do so, because it's nothing to do with trust. It's just it can only relay what it sees based on the content and the prompt that you've gave it. If you've given it a terrible prompt, you cannot just expect some magic source of content that comes out of that. So, yeah, internally, I've been running workshops for us to think about critical thinking as a topic and utilizing a combination of critical thinking and output from AI. But actually, the end result should be a collaboration between the two.
That's definitely something that organizations will have to contend with in the coming years. And it'll be interesting to see the strategies that people deploy to ensure that they are, as you say, collaborating with AI rather than letting it replace those functions entirely. On that note, and looking at the cloud more broadly, what do you expect in terms of transformation in the next 2 to 3 years? What are some changes that organizations can look forward to?
It's a super exciting time to be alive as a technologist. I'm sure you feel exactly the same way, reporting on technology as well. It's just amazing, right? So I think about AI, Gen AI, agentic AI, even quantum, right? Quantum's been around for over 40 years now as a concept. But I still feel that it's very specialized use cases for quantum. But I feel almost in a similar vein that it's all about trust, and that adoption will be purely based on trust. It will also be based on, I think, the velocity of the adoption of AI-based services will be largely dependent on trust. It will be based on regulations. As I said, consumer trust and organizational trust. And I think almost it will also be critical around like the normalization of societal expectations of what AI delivers. I think it just needs to become something I think many people are still fearful of. As long as it continues to be explainable, I think that we will see a steady adoption of this amazing technology. And I just think over the next 2 or 3 years, I don't think we'll see a massive spike in usage. I just think that everyone's on their own journey. And as I said, culture is as important as the adoption of the actual technology.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. But Alex, thanks so much for joining us.
Great. Thanks for your time, Rory.
As always, you can find links to all of the topics we've spoken about today in the show notes, and even more on our website at itpro.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, as well as subscribe to our daily newsletter. Don't forget to subscribe to the IT Pro podcast wherever you find podcasts. And if you're enjoying the show, let us know by leaving a rating or review. We'll be back next week with more from the world of IT, but until then, goodbye.